Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. My guest is Dr. Gregory Popcak. He joins us every week. He is the host of More to Life with his bride, Lisa Popcak, and they are the developers of the CatholicHOM app, a resource that helps Catholic families thrive. Greg, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
So, you and your bride do so much at the forefront of dialoguing John Paul II's theology of the body in helping Catholic families thrive. I think now more than ever, it's crucial that we recall this heritage.
Yes, that's right. And I think something that people don't really appreciate or understand is why he did a lot of the things he did, what the overarching goal was. You know, he was the first pope whose pontificate was entirely following the Second Vatican Council. Of course, John Paul I, but he passed away after only 30 days, so you can't really count him. But you know, the Second Vatican Council called for the universal call to holiness, which meant that, which actually at the time was a real insight, that it wasn't just priests and religious who were called to be holy, but everybody was. The thing, though, that gets in the way of that is that most of what we think of as Catholic spirituality is really drawn from the monastic and clerical traditions.
Yes.
And it doesn't tend to fit very neatly into the lay experience, especially in marriage and family life. You know, I mean, most of what we think of as Catholic spirituality is rooted in asceticism and contemplation and reflection and silence. That doesn't describe marriage and family life at all. And so that's not to say that those spiritual tools aren't helpful for us or aren't beautiful or useful in their own way, but a lot of people do struggle to use those tools, especially once we get married and have kids. And so St. John Paul was looking at, I believe, how could we create a Catholic spirituality that sees lay life, especially marriage and family life, as a feature, not a bug, when it came to Catholic spirituality and the pursuit of holiness. And the challenge there is, of course, so for example, when every order of priest or religious, you know, will take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but those things will look different based on the order and the charism that a person might join. Right. But they still have that common language, that common basis for what their spirituality is going to look like. But how do you identify what all lay people have in common? You know, how can you build a spirituality for all lay people and have them be able to relate to it? We have to identify something that everybody has in common, and that's next to impossible, right? Well, we all have bodies, and so St. John Paul created the theology of the body as a way of saying, all right, let's reflect as lay persons, or really as all persons, but especially as lay people in marriages and family lives. How is God speaking to us through our bodies? What is he saying about the pursuit of holiness and how healthy and holy relationships should be based on the way he built our bodies? Right. And then building out from there, he laid the foundation for a lay approach to holiness.
And that lay approach to holiness that John Paul II did, he essentially dusting off some perennial teachings of the church, because like you mentioned, traditionally we got so used to the fact that the monastic tradition informs the liturgical and prayer life of the church, but lay people had a different way of participating in that reality. So what John Paul II was doing was representing this old teaching in a very novel way for us.
Well, that's right. And so in addition to identifying how we could begin to understand God's call to holiness, speaking to us through our bodies, he began doing things like canonizing more lay and married saints than ever before. He promoted St. Therese of Lisieux to the position of doctor of the Church because of her little way of holiness, and seeing that her little way of holiness enabled lay people to become what I like to call active contemplatives, in the sense of being able to hear God speaking to us through the little things that we do throughout the day, and how he's wanting us to respond to those things. He promoted the devotion to Saint Faustina's divine mercy, because he needed us to recognize that we who are so caught up in doing things all the time can't work our way toward holiness or salvation on our own power, that we have to rely on God's superabundant mercy. Right. And so many other similar things where he was, another thing, he cast all of salvation history and looked at it through the lens of Christ the bridegroom instead of the classic vision of Christ the high priest. And all of these things were not to discount any of the spiritual traditions before, but rather to recast them in some way so that lay people could understand them better and participate more effectively in the universal call to holiness.
And I'm thinking of what you just said about this abundance of grace. So I listen to you and Lisa virtually every day, and every day there's something I can learn. But last week I felt really cut to the heart with something you shared about how I can. You shared it indirectly about how I can be a better husband, and I realized that drawing from this question of being a gift of self to the other means that I really am compelled to go out of myself. And so the abundance of grace I found in not just your work, but John Paul II, is to draw me out of myself for the good of the other in relationship.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and that's really what holiness is for all people, but especially for lay people, to learn to love each other more than we love our comfort zones, right? Because we all love our comfort zones more than we love other people, and that's a constant temptation for us, right? But that idea of being self-giving, right, is really rooted in that idea of let's through God's grace challenge each other, challenge ourselves to love each other more than our comfort zones. I think though that the challenge is, that this what I'm describing here as the really major legacy of St. John Paul's ministry and work has largely been missed by people kind of on the left and the right. So on the left there's this tendency to kind of dismiss this project that St. John Paul took up and instead just focus on clericalizing the laity, which St. John Paul warned against in Christa Filiaci, where he talked about that danger of clericalizing the laity and just talking about, well, if lay people want to be holy too, then we should open up ordination in every way to everyone. But then on the right, I think people are missing this too, because they're trying to put new wine into old wineskins by saying things like, for example, well, lay people can pray the liturgy of the hours too, which is beautiful, by the way, and I'm not suggesting you shouldn't do it or that it's not good, but how many families actually do?
Right.
And it's, again, what we're doing there is just saying, well, let's take these monastic and clerical ways of praying and just give them to the laity. And again, they're beautiful and they can be useful in their own way, and if you're doing them, more power to you. But there are a lot of families and couples, individuals who can't, and we all deserve an authentic, ecological, if you will, experience of Catholic spirituality that's rooted in the lay experience and the marriage and family experience. And the Church has not taken that call up by and large. And as a result, St. John Paul's, the most important part of St. John Paul's work, has yet to still be unpacked.
And you guys are doing a great job unpacking it. Christopher West and his Theology of the Body Institute is doing that. But there really remains so much more to be done if we can really get down to what John Paul II had as a vision for marriage, family, and the flourishing of the human person in society.
Well, I think so, and I think I'm concerned that the Theology of the Body and a lot of his other initiatives are kind of being seen as a historical footnote. It's like, well, that was fine for that time, and now we've moved on to something else.
Oh wow!
Now it's time to, but we haven't really even begun to look at what is the significance of St. John Paul's work for the lay person. And honestly, that's one of the reasons that I do refer to him as St. John Paul the Great, because he's really one of the first people, if not the first person, in the Church to look at what does spirituality look like from the lay perspective, especially as it relates to marriage and family life. And how can lay people and married people and parents in particular stop feeling like second-class citizens in the kingdom of God because we haven't been given the right tools that we need to pursue holiness in our state.
Right. And the holiness that we are called to, this is, like you said, the universal call. I'm just stunned by the fact that this might be relegated to a footnote. So we have our work cut out for us, and thank God for what you and Lisa are doing.
Thank you, Marcus, for allowing us to talk about it.
My guest, Dr. Greg Popcak, he and his bride Lisa are the hosts of More to Life that airs on Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, producers of the CatholicHOM app. They're driven by the theology of the body that John Paul II has so wondrously laid out for us. And that's what we've been talking about. Let's keep scratching the surface of it and getting deeper for the sake of our families. I'm Marcus Peter.